May 1945. The most destructive war in human history was finally coming to an end. Nazi Germany had been defeated. Adolf Hitler was dead. The concentration camps had been liberated. The full horror of what the Nazi regime had done to millions of innocent people was being revealed to a shocked and horrified world. The Nuremberg trials were being organized to bring Nazi war criminals to justice. America had just spent years fighting and dying to defeat the ideology of hatred and genocide that the Nazi regime represented. The world was finally ready to move forward, to build something better, to ensure that nothing like this would ever happen again. And yet, at the very same moment that American soldiers were liberating concentration camps and documenting Nazi atrocities, a secret operation was already underway. A secret operation that would bring hundreds of those same Nazis to American soil, give them new identities, erase their crimes, and put them to work for the United States government. The Nazi war machine had produced some of the most brilliant and most dangerous scientific minds of the 20th century. German scientists had developed the V-2 rocket, the world's first ballistic missile. They had pioneered jet engine technology. They had made extraordinary advances in aviation medicine, often through horrific experiments conducted on concentration camp prisoners without their consent. These were not innocent academics. Many of them had been active members of the Nazi Party. Many had used slave labor in their research facilities. Many had conducted or overseen experiments that killed and maimed thousands of prisoners. They had put their scientific brilliance in service of a regime that murdered 6 million Jewish people and millions of others. And when the war ended, American intelligence officers looked at these men and saw not war criminals, but assets. Valuable scientific assets that America desperately needed. The operation was born out of Cold War fear. American intelligence officials were terrified that the Soviet Union would capture Germany's top scientists before America could. The race was on. Within days of Germany's surrender, American intelligence teams fanned out across the country searching for scientists, engineers, and technical experts. They were given a simple mission: find them before the Soviets do. Bring them in, whatever their past, whatever they had done. The program was initially called Operation Overcast, then renamed Operation Paperclip, a reference to the paperclips that were attached to the files of scientists deemed valuable enough to recruit. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency oversaw the program. They were given clear instructions about who to recruit. Those instructions included a specific prohibition against recruiting anyone who was more than a nominal participant in Nazi activities. That prohibition was almost immediately and systematically ignored. The scientists recruited under Operation Paperclip had a problem. Many of them had Nazi Party memberships. Many had SS ranks. Many had direct connections to concentration camp experiments and slave labor programs. Under American law and under the terms of the Nuremberg trials, these men should have been prosecuted as war criminals, not employed by the United States government. So the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency did something extraordinary. They simply rewrote the scientists' files. Security reports that documented Nazi Party memberships were altered or destroyed. Connections to war crimes were removed from official records. Men who had been active Nazis were reclassified as nominal participants or technical experts with no political involvement. New identities were created. New histories were written. and the United States State Department, which had the authority to block the program, was deliberately kept in the dark. The deception was systematic, deliberate, and signed off at the highest levels of the American government. Beginning in 1945 and continuing for years afterward, over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technical experts were brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. They arrived at American military bases where they were greeted not as prisoners or suspects but as valued colleagues. They were given housing, salaries, research facilities. Their families were eventually brought over to join them. They were settled into American communities across the country. In Huntsville, Alabama, in Fort Bliss, Texas, in Dayton, Ohio. They shopped in American stores. Their children attended American schools. They became part of American life, and almost nobody around them had any idea who they really were, what they had really done, or how they had really come to be in America. The secret was kept remarkably well for decades. The most famous of the Operation Paperclip scientists was Wernher von Braun, a brilliant rocket engineer who had designed the V-2 rocket for Nazi Germany. The V-2 had been built using slave labor from the Mittelwerk factory, where an estimated 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died from the brutal working conditions. Von Braun himself had visited the Mittelwerk factory and was aware of the conditions there. Under Operation Paperclip, his Nazi Party membership and his SS rank were erased from his official file. He was brought to America and eventually became the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. He became a celebrated American hero. He appeared on the covers of magazines. He hosted television programs about space exploration. He became the public face of America's space program, and almost nobody knew his real history. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human being to walk on the moon. It was perhaps the greatest achievement in human history, a triumph of American ingenuity and determination. The Saturn V rocket that carried the Apollo 11 mission to the moon was designed by Wernher von Braun, the man who had designed rockets for Adolf Hitler, the man whose rockets had rained terror on London and Antwerp, the man whose rocket factory had been built by concentration camp slave laborers. He stood in NASA mission control that night watching his rocket carry American astronauts to the moon, celebrated as one of the greatest Americans of his generation, while the families of the 20,000 people who had died building his V-2 rockets in Nazi Germany were never acknowledged, never compensated, and largely forgotten. Operation Paperclip was classified for decades. The American public had no idea that their government had recruited former Nazis and erased their war crimes. The scientists themselves rarely spoke about their past. When journalists occasionally asked uncomfortable questions about their Nazi histories, the questions were deflected or ignored. The government maintained the fiction that these were simply brilliant scientists who had been on the wrong side of history, not active participants in a genocidal regime. Jewish organizations in America were outraged when they learned the truth. They protested. They lobbied. They demanded accountability. They were largely ignored. The Cold War justified everything. The race to beat the Soviets to space justified everything. The need for America's military and scientific superiority justified everything, or so the government believed. The full truth about Operation Paperclip began to emerge slowly over decades as classified documents were gradually declassified. Journalists and historians pieced together the full story from government, files military records and personal testimony. In 2014, author Annie Jacobson published a comprehensive book called Operation Paperclip that documented the full extent of the program using declassified government documents. The book revealed in detail how Nazi war criminals had been deliberately recruited, how their files had been falsified, how the American government had knowingly employed men who had participated in some of the worst atrocities of the Second World War. The reaction was outrage, but by then most of the scientists were dead. Most had lived full, comfortable American lives, received awards and honors, died peacefully, and faced no consequences whatsoever for what they had done in Nazi Germany. Operation Paperclip ended officially in 1990. By then, over 1,600 scientists had been brought to America under the program. Their contributions to American science and military technology were undeniable. The rockets they designed sent Americans to the moon. The technologies they developed shaped the modern world. But the moral cost of what America did to achieve those things has never been fully reckoned with. The victims of the V-2 rocket program. The concentration camp prisoners who died in Nazi research facilities. The survivors of the experiments that some of these scientists had overseen. They received nothing. Their suffering was deemed acceptable collateral damage in the Cold War race for scientific supremacy. Operation Paperclip is not just a historical footnote. It is a question that America has never fully answered. How far is too far? What crimes can be forgiven in the name of national interest? And what do we owe to the victims of the people we chose to protect? Over 1,600 Nazi scientists brought to America, their war crimes erased, their Nazi histories buried, their victims forgotten, and the rockets they built sent Americans to the moon. Operation Paperclip is one of the most disturbing and morally complex stories in American history. It is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a story about what happens when governments decide that winning is more important than justice. If this story shocked you, please subscribe to Echoes of the Dead, because every single week we uncover the programs that were hidden, the crimes that were buried, the victims that were forgotten, because the truth always deserves to be told.